You walk the cobbled streets of Philadelphia in the late summer of 1793. And the air is heavy, thicker than usual. It is not only the heat that weighs upon you, it is the smell. Sweet, putrid, unmistakable, the odor of flesh beginning to rot. On some doorsteps, you see black cloth draped across, the silent marker of another household struck. A cart rattles past, wooden wheels jarring against uneven stones. In it, bodies lie heaped, covered loosely by sheets, their limbs stiffened into angles that betray the agony of their final hours. One of them slips free as the cart jolts forward, an arm. Yellowed at the skin, black at the fingertips, no one dares to stop and cover it. The driver only whips his horse harder. Philadelphia, the capital of the young United States, the seat of Congress, the home of Washington himself, is falling silent. Shops close, churches stand empty, bells toll endlessly, announcing yet another death. The city that only months before rang with debate, ambition, and the promise of a new nation is now gripped by something invisible. Something that turns eyes yellow, swells tongues, and causes men to vomit black bile until they collapse in the streets. This is the yellow fever epidemic. And you are not apart from it, you are in it. You can feel the heat rising from the bricks. Hear the cry of a mother who cannot persuade her neighbors to help bury her child. And see the once proud avenues of America's first great city transformed into corridors of abandonment. Doctors argue in pamphlets about cures, ministers thunder that it is divine punishment. But you only see the coffins piling high at the edges of town. The past is not dead, it is only waiting. If what you are about to witness unsettles you, or awakens a part of you long dormant, consider subscribing, not for numbers, but to help these buried stories rise again. If it brings value, leave a like. If it stays with you, leave silence. Philadelphia, 1793. A city of 40,000 souls. By autumn's end, nearly 1 in 10 would be gone. The fever began with whispers, sailors from the Caribbean, cargo ships unloading rum and coffee, the smell of sugar clinging to the docks. Then came the first reports, a strange sickness. Skin flushed yellow, eyes bloodshot, breath shallow. At first, few believed it would spread. America was still young, raw, brimming with confidence that nature itself could be tamed. But by September, hearses could not keep pace. Graveyards overflowed. Families fled into the countryside, leaving behind those too poor, too weak, or too loyal to abandon their posts. The government collapsed in fear. President George Washington and his cabinet fled to Germantown, leaving Philadelphia without leadership. Congress adjourned. Judges, clerks, and shopkeepers locked their doors. Even the mail service faltered. The nation's capital, the symbolic heart of the republic, was abandoned. Those who remained found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Houses sealed with lime and vinegar, in hopes that bad air might be driven away. Bonfires lit in the streets to purify the atmosphere, their smoke mingling with the stench of death. Clergymen and physicians argued in the newspapers, even as more fell ill themselves. Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of the nation's most famous doctors and a signer of the Declaration of Independence, prescribed bloodletting so extreme that patients fainted before they could rise from their beds again. Some recovered, by luck, not by leeches. Most did not. And all the while, the carts rolled on, carrying the dead to mass graves outside the city walls. Entire families disappeared in a week. Neighbors bolted their doors, refusing to admit even friends for fear of contagion. Priests who tried to administer last rites collapsed at the bedsides of their parishioners. At night, you might walk past a window and see only a dim candle guttering, illuminating a figure slumped across a table, unmoving. This was not just a medical crisis. It was a crisis of trust, of survival, of the very soul of the city. For in Philadelphia, in 1793, you could not know if your next breath might bring life or the poison of death that lingered in the heat. You stand at the Delaware River docks in August of 1793. The sun beats down upon the water, making it shimmer like a sheet of molten silver. Ships are moored along the wharves, their sails furled, their cargoes heavy with coffee, sugar, and rum from the West Indies. The smell of molasses lingers, mingled with the sharper scent of fish and tar. Sailors move about the decks, their skin glistening with sweat. Some cough quietly into their sleeves. A few stumble as they carry crates. At first, no one pays attention. Fevers are common in summer. The city knows the rhythms of heat and illness. But something is different. Within days, those same sailors are gone from the docks, carried away by men who avert their eyes, their bodies wrapped hastily in cloth. Their skin, those who glimpse it say, is yellow like old parchment. Their mouths are stained dark. Rumors spread that these deaths are not ordinary. Perhaps the sickness comes from rotting coffee left too long in the hold of a ship. Others whisper it has drifted in on the foul mists of the tropics. No one can agree, and yet the deaths continue. Philadelphia is the largest city in the United States, its streets alive with commerce and debate. But the disease makes no distinction between poor and prosperous. In the narrow alleys, beggars and freedmen fall as quickly as merchants and clerks. At first, the numbers are small, an unusual death here. A household emptied there. The bells toll, but no more than usual. Death is not a stranger to this city. And yet, when you walk the market by High Street, you notice the spaces between the stalls growing wider. A woman who once sold butter no longer appears. The man who sharpened knives has vanished. Someone mentions they died suddenly, after days of bleeding from the mouth. You pass a tavern one evening and hear men debating. Some insist the fever cannot spread through touch. They claim it rises only from miasma, from corrupted air rising off the wharves. Stay away from the docks, one advises, and you will be safe. Others say it is already loose, carried by invisible hands into every street. The arguments grow heated. Someone pounds the table so hard the mugs jump. But the truth is, no one knows. Doctors disagree as well. Dr. Benjamin Rush, respected across the nation, declares that the fever is yellow fever, the same as has struck the Caribbean. He prescribes purges and bloodletting, convinced that by draining the body of its bad humors, life might be saved. His colleagues scoff or remain silent. Some experiment with bark, wine, or vinegar washes. Each writes pamphlets to defend their theories, even as more patients are carried out on stretchers. By early September, the streets begin to change. The hum of commerce diminishes. Carriages avoid the central squares. The smell of vinegar fills the air, as households splash it on their doorways and furniture, believing it to be a shield against contagion. Fires are lit in the open, their smoke rising into the humid sky in a futile attempt to cleanse the air. Children, once running freely, are kept indoors. Their absence is louder than their play. You hear it one morning, the sound of a death cart rolling down Walnut Street. The driver calls for bodies. Doors open hesitantly, and bundles are carried out, laid one atop another. The driver does not touch them with his hands. He uses a hook, dragging the stiff shapes into place. The horses snort and shy from the smell. The cart moves on, the sound of the wheels groaning like a dirge. Behind shuttered windows, families watch and whisper prayers. Panic begins to take hold. Those who can leave, leave. Wealthy families pack carriages and flee into the countryside, abandoning homes, shops, and even servants. By the thousands, citizens pour out of Philadelphia, seeking refuge in surrounding villages. Dust clouds rise on the roads leading west, like columns of refugees from a war. Yet not all can escape. The poor remain, the sick remain, and those bound by duty, nurses, grave diggers, a few clergy, remain. The fever does not relent. Each day the toll rises. By mid-September, funerals are too many to count. Coffins cannot be built fast enough. Entire families disappear in a matter of days. When you walk past the churchyards, you see the earth heaving with fresh graves. Row upon row, dug shallow in haste. The sextons are exhausted, their hands blistered, their clothes soaked through with sweat. At night, torches burn in the cemeteries as men labor to lower more bodies into the ground. The sight is terrible, but worse is the sound, the muffled thuds of soil falling on coffins, repeating into the darkness. And yet, life clings on. Bread is still baked, though fewer loaves. The market still opens, though the stalls are sparse. The bells of Christ Church still ring, though their peals are heavy, each note weighted with grief. You find yourself walking faster, speaking less, as if words might invite the fever closer. The very air feels hostile, heavy with unseen death. One evening, as the sun sets red over the rooftops, you see a woman kneeling in the street beside a body. It is her husband. She pleads for help, but no one comes near. The neighbors shut their doors. A priest passes, mutters a prayer, and keeps walking. The woman weeps, clutching the corpse until men arrive with the cart. They pry her fingers loose. She is screaming when they lift her husband away. The cart rattles off. She collapses on the cobblestones. Alone. By morning, you hear, she too is gone. Philadelphia has known hardship before, fires, famine, even war. But this is different. This is abandonment. The fever is no longer a rumor. It is a force that strips away dignity. That makes men fear their own neighbors. That silences the proudest city of the Republic. You can feel it closing in. Every time a bell tolls. Every time another cart passes by. Every time the air grows thick with the scent of decay. And you realize, the first stirrings of the fever are over. The city is no longer at the edge. It has stepped into the abyss. You wake one morning in mid-September, and the silence is more terrible than the sound of bells. The streets of Philadelphia are nearly empty now. Where once carriages clattered and merchants shouted prices, there is only the occasional creak of a shutter in the wind. Dust lies thick on market stalls that have not opened in weeks. Even the birds seem to have fled, as though the air itself warns them away. You are left with the smell, acrid vinegar, wood smoke from endless fires, and beneath it the sickly sweetness of rot. The fever has claimed so many that ordinary life has collapsed. City officials have fled, judges, clerks, and even members of Congress have abandoned their posts, scattering to safer towns. The federal government itself, barely established, has retreated. The president, George Washington, left the city on September 10th, seeking refuge in Germantown. The machinery of the Republic falls quiet. And Philadelphia, once the proud capital, is leaderless. You walk past the State House, its windows shuttered, its chambers deserted. Where the Declaration of Independence once rang with voices, there is only dust and silence. The poor cannot leave. You see them crouched in doorways, too weak to move, too frightened to knock on another's door. Entire alleys are abandoned save for the sick groaning inside. Neighbors bar their gates, terrified of contact. Those who venture out wear handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar tied over their faces. They clutch herbs or camphor in their hands, as though smell itself might shield them. Mothers press garlic to their children's lips, whispering desperate prayers. Each day, the carts rattle through. Drivers call out in hoarse voices, "Bring out your dead." Families drag bodies wrapped in sheets to the street. Some lay them gently, with whispered blessings. Others drop them and retreat quickly, doors slamming shut behind. The carts fill rapidly. By the time they reach the outskirts, limbs protrude, stiff and twisted, the cloth slipping to reveal faces waxen and yellow, mouths frozen in a grimace. The grave diggers have no time for ceremony. Trenches are opened, coffins stacked, soil shoveled hastily. The ground cannot hold them all. You watch as rain one evening collapses a fresh grave, and the outlines of the coffins shift beneath the mud. Doctors work tirelessly, yet their presence brings little comfort. Benjamin Rush continues his purges and bleedings. His patients often so weakened that they die under his hands. Some accuse him of killing more than he saves. But still the desperate knock on his door. Others try different methods: cold baths, herbal infusions, fumigations with burning sulfur. No cure works. The fever spares or it does not, and no man can alter its course. Physicians themselves fall ill, their numbers dwindling with each week. You remember the letter printed in the newspapers. It is impossible to walk the streets without perceiving the sick or the dead. The words are true. When you venture out, you see doors marked with chalk, signaling that fever is within. Some are scrawled with desperate messages. Help us. Food needed. Few dare respond. Churches are overwhelmed. Ministers struggle to bury their own parishioners. Some refuse to enter infected houses, fearing contagion. Others go bravely and fall ill themselves. Bells that once tolled for weddings and baptisms toll now only for the dead, so frequently that the sound blends into the rhythm of the city, as natural as the wind. Yet amid the fear, a small community steps forward, the Free African Society. Its leaders, Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, organize volunteers to nurse the sick, bury the dead, and comfort the abandoned. They move through the streets where others will not, carrying the ill to hospitals, washing bodies, digging graves. At first, they are hailed as saviors, but whispers soon turn against them. Some accuse them of profiting from the misery, charging high prices for their work. Jones and Allen defend themselves in print, reminding the city that they risk their lives daily where few others will. Their words ring with dignity, but the accusations remain. Even in plague, prejudice does not die. As the weeks stretch on, the exodus grows. Of Philadelphia's 40,000 residents, nearly 20,000 have fled. Roads leading west are clogged with wagons and riders. The countryside groans under the weight of refugees. Farmers shut their gates, fearful of the sickness arriving with the city folk. Some travelers die along the way, their bodies left hastily by the roadside. You can imagine the smell of death trailing beyond the city, following its people into the hills and valleys beyond. Inside the city, the emptiness is surreal. Theaters are shuttered, taverns stand dark. The marketplace is silent except for a few desperate hawkers selling vinegar, garlic, or charms against the fever. The hospital is overwhelmed, its wards filled with the stench of vomit and sweat. Nurses faint from exhaustion. Patients scream deliriously, then fall silent as death claims them. The hospital graveyard swells each day. One evening, you walk by the river and see fires burning on the banks. Men are fumigating cargo, believing smoke will purify it. Shadows flicker against the warehouses, twisted shapes that make the buildings themselves seem diseased. A rat scurries across the dock, vanishes into a crate. Someone throws a stone, cursing. Many believe vermin are to blame, but none can prove it. Theories abound, yet the fever continues its course, indifferent to human guesses. By late September, more than 100 die each day. The numbers are printed grimly in the newspapers, lists of names. Households destroyed. Fear grows so great that people refuse to touch coins or letters, believing the very objects might carry death. Trade collapses. Ships refuse to dock. The lifeblood of the city, commerce, has stopped flowing. And then, the city becomes truly abandoned. You walk through streets where every window is shuttered, every door bolted. The silence presses upon you, heavy and unnatural. A dog whines in the distance, left behind by fleeing owners. A child's doll lies in the dust, dropped in haste. The grandeur of the capital is gone. Philadelphia is no longer a symbol of independence, but of fragility, a warning that even the boldest republic can be humbled by disease. By October, The fever still rages. The cold nights begin to creep in. But relief is not yet certain. Thousands are already dead. Families are shattered. Government remains absent. You realize that Philadelphia is no longer merely stricken, it is abandoned. Left to the mercy of chance, charity, and death. And still, each morning, the carts come. You approach a narrow street near Dock Creek in October, and the air is heavy with the mingling of autumn chill and the lingering odor of decay. The fever has not loosened its grip, though the nights have grown colder. The city is quieter than ever. Whole rows of houses stand dark, shutters barred, chimneys cold. Only a few thin curls of smoke rise where families still cling to life. You step carefully, for silence itself feels alive here, broken only by the roll of a death cart or the muffled weeping that leaks through closed doors. The fever's cruelty lies not only in how many it claims, but in how it isolates. Families dissolve within their own walls. A mother falls, then a father, then children too young to understand why no one rises to prepare their food. When neighbors finally dare to enter, they find entire households stiff and silent, the beds soaked with sweat, the air rank with sickness. You hear accounts of infants crying beside lifeless mothers, their wails fading as no one dares step inside. These are not rumors, these are reports carried in the diaries of the living, printed in the notices of the dead. You remember one particular scene told by a surviving minister, entering a home where 4 bodies lay in the same room. A child, barely breathing, sat upright in a chair, too weak to cry. The minister lifted the child to carry him away, only to discover that fever had already claimed him. His small body gave its last breath against the minister's shoulder. This is what you walk among now. Houses that are not homes, but tombs. Inside many dwellings, windows are sealed tight against what people believe is poisoned air. The lack of ventilation makes the interiors worse. Imagine stepping into one. The stench is suffocating. A mixture of stagnant sweat, vomit dried on blankets, and the unmistakable sweetness of death. The furniture is coated in vinegar. Walls damp where desperate hands have splashed mixtures thought to cleanse. Bowls of garlic, onions, and herbs rot on tables, untouched by those too sick to eat. A Bible lies open, pages warped by moisture, as though it too sweated under the fever's presence. At night, the city feels haunted. The usual glow of lamps is gone. Few dare leave candles burning, fearing fire with no neighbors to help extinguish it. You walk through alleys lit only by moonlight, and the silence is broken by the sudden rattle of a shutter or the scream of a delirious patient echoing into the dark. The sound chills you more than any silence. Some nights, you hear the crash of glass as the sick throw themselves from windows, maddened by thirst or pain. The next day, their bodies are gathered, their faces frozen in terror. Even those who survive the fever are marked. Survivors describe bleeding from gums, black vomit expelled in heaves so violent they tear the throat. They speak of unquenchable thirst, of a burning heat within while their skin grows cold and clammy. Some recover suddenly, rising from bed after days of delirium, as though the fever had simply lost interest. Others seem on the mend, only to collapse in convulsions hours later, blood trickling from nose and ears. You cannot predict, you can only wait. One house near the outskirts becomes infamous in whispers. A father died first, followed by his wife, then their elder children. A single girl of 8 remained alive for nearly a week. Neighbors hearing her call faintly from the window. None dared to enter. When finally the cart men broke down the door, she was found lying across her mother's body, her face pressed into the cold skin as though clinging to warmth. By then, she was already gone. Such stories are not rare. They are multiplied across Philadelphia, each one another silent house in a silent city. The Free African Society continues its work, moving into these houses when others will not. Their volunteers drag bodies out, scrub the floors with vinegar, and dig graves. They are praised by some, condemned by others, but always needed. Without them, the city would choke under its own dead. You pass one of these men on the street, his face gaunt, his clothes stained, his eyes hollow. He carries the smell of lime and earth, a smell you now associate with survival itself. Religion, too, struggles. Ministers preach of judgment, of God's wrath upon a sinful city. Some call for fasting and prayer, others blame French immigrants, sailors, or foreign corruption. Yet the fever strikes all alike, and prayers seem to rise unanswered. Still, in some houses, candles burn before small altars, and whispered hymns fill the silence. People cling to faith not because it cures, but because it is all that remains. By late October, the toll is staggering. Nearly 5,000 are dead, 1 in 10 of Philadelphia's people. Newspapers print long lists of the deceased, their names spilling across columns. You scan the names, and every line holds a neighbor, a tradesman, a friend. The weight is crushing. Survivors write that they no longer expected to live. They measured their days in hours, never knowing when their turn might come. The houses themselves become symbols of fear. Doors are marked, sometimes with chalk crosses, sometimes with crude warnings. Fever within. The bravest walk past quickly, their heads turned away. Some houses are abandoned mid-meal, plates left on tables, chairs overturned, as families fled too quickly to care. Returning weeks later, refugees find their homes changed utterly, windows broken, furniture stolen, and the marks of fever carved into every surface. When frost finally comes in November, the change is gradual. Fewer bells toll each morning. The carts gather fewer bodies. Word spreads that the fever weakens as the air cools. Hope flickers. Doors open cautiously. Survivors emerge, pale and hollow-eyed, to find their city transformed. Streets once bustling with thousands now feel vast and empty. Children are fewer, their laughter gone. Shops reopen slowly, but the city breathes unevenly. Like a convalescent still close to death, you stand before one of those silent houses. Its windows dark, its door ajar. Inside, dust motes drift in the weak sunlight. A broken chair lies on the floor. The hearth is cold. On the wall hangs a portrait, its painted eyes gazing out over a room of absence. The house tells its story without words. A family lived, loved, and perished here. Consumed by a fever no one could see, no one could stop, and as you leave, you realize that Philadelphia itself has become such a house, a grand home. Proud and ambitious, now hollowed by silence, carrying the memory of thousands who will not return. The fever is fading, but its shadow will never leave. You walk past Christ Church as November nears its end, and the bells, which once tolled without pause, are silent now. The air is colder, sharper, the breath visible in the morning. And with the frost has come mercy. Death carts are fewer, their wheels less constant upon the cobbles. The graves are still fresh, but they are no longer dug in frantic haste. For the first time in months, the city draws a deeper breath. Yet the silence that remains is not peace, it is absence. Philadelphia has lost nearly 5,000 souls. Whole neighborhoods stand hollowed, houses vacant, shutters banging in the wind. The fever has retreated, but what it leaves behind is not restoration. It is the outline of a city that has looked into its own grave and found it half full. You feel it when you step into the marketplace. The stalls are open again, but thinned. Voices echo too freely across spaces once crowded with thousands. The butchers, the bakers, the cobblers return one by one, their eyes hollow, their families smaller. The churches reopen as well, but their pews are scarred by absence. Ministers look out across congregations diminished. Families seated with gaps where sons or daughters once sat. The hymns rise, but their sound is muted, as if the walls themselves remember too many funerals. Sermons speak of divine lessons, of judgment and endurance. But the faces of the listeners are worn, their faith tempered by loss. Some look heavenward with gratitude for survival. Others stare at the floor, struggling with bitterness that so many prayers went unanswered. You hear the debates begin almost at once. Doctors defend their methods. Benjamin Rush insists his purges and bleedings saved lives, though many accuse him of hastening death. Others argue that only time and the changing season defeated the fever. Pamphlets fly from printing presses, each man claiming truth, each protecting reputation, but none can change the fact: medicine failed, and thousands died despite the remedies. The survivors know this. They carry scars not only on their bodies but in their trust. The government creeps back into the city. Congress reconvenes. Washington returns. The Capitol resumes its duties. Yet a shadow lingers. Officials debate quarantine laws, improvements to sanitation, the building of hospitals. Yet beneath the arguments is the memory that in the city's darkest hours, they had fled. Many citizens will not forget that abandonment. Philadelphia is scarred not only by disease but by betrayal. And yet, there are voices of endurance. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones published their defense, reminding the city that black volunteers nursed the sick and buried the dead when others would not. Their pamphlet, a narrative of the proceedings of the black people during the late awful calamity, stands as testimony against slander, a reminder that compassion had not wholly vanished. Their words echo with dignity, carving a legacy of courage amid ruin. As winter settles, life inches forward. Refugees trickle back into the city, finding homes looted, businesses collapsed, friends buried. Some families are gone entirely, their names remembered only in the long lists printed in September and October. Survivors gather in taverns, not to toast prosperity but to share stories: who endured, who fled, who succumbed. Their voices carry the tone of those who have witnessed too much. You step into a churchyard one evening. The ground is uneven with fresh mounds, each marked by hurried stones or wooden crosses. Snow dusts the earth, softening the outlines of death. In one corner, a bell rope lies coiled, frayed from constant use. You imagine the hands that pulled it day after day, announcing each departure until grief dulled even the tolling. Now the bell hangs silent, heavy in the frosted air. You reach out to the rope, and it is rough in your hand, as though it still remembers the weight of sorrow it carried. The silence of the city is the silence of survivors. Every corner holds memory. The docks where sailors coughed, the alleys where mothers wept, the houses where children died unseen. They are quieter now, but the quiet is not empty, it is haunted. You walk these streets, and you feel that you are not alone. The dead remain, not in flesh, but in the air, in the stones, in the silence itself. The fever will return again in later years. Philadelphia will face yellow fever more than once, though never with such fury as in 1793. But the first great outbreak leaves its mark indelibly. It teaches that cities can be emptied without fire or sword, that governments can crumble without battle, that death can reign with nothing more than heat, water, and time. You stand in the cold air and listen. Somewhere, a single bell rings, faint, uncertain, as though testing whether it still has purpose. Its sound drifts across the empty streets, echoing against shuttered windows. It does not summon mourners, nor does it warn of plague. It tolls because it must, because even silence must be broken. And in that moment, you understand. The last bell of Philadelphia's fever is not for the dead. It is for the living, to remind them that they have endured. The city stirs again. Life resumes its uneven rhythm. But for those who walked through the fever, for you who bore witness, the echo of that bell will never fade. It rings not only for those buried in shallow graves, but for the fragility of every promise, every nation, every life. You walk once more through Philadelphia. Though months have passed since the fever's retreat, The air is cold now, sharp with winter's breath. The streets are busier, wagons creak. Shopkeepers sweep their thresholds, and voices rise again. But the city is not what it was. Too many shutters remain closed. Too many pews stand empty. The scars are invisible to the stranger, yet clear to those who survived. You pause at a small burial ground on the edge of town. Snow clings to the uneven earth, softening the outlines of graves dug too quickly, too shallow. Some are marked with crude wooden crosses, already splintering in the frost. Others bear no marker at all, only the memory of bodies hurried into the soil by exhausted hands. A child's toy rests half buried in the snow, left there by someone who could not return. A name carved into a fence post, barely legible, testifies to a family erased. These small traces speak more loudly than monuments. In the records, it is written that nearly 5,000 died in the epidemic of 1793, about 1 in every 10 souls of Philadelphia. But the numbers cannot hold the weight of what you have seen. Statistics do not capture the smell of vinegar soaking the walls, the sight of a cart piled with yellowed corpses, the sound of a mother's scream as her child is taken. They do not reveal the silence that followed when whole households vanished, leaving only cold hearths and rotting food. The fever taught the city lessons no declaration or constitution could. It showed that power and wealth cannot protect against breath and blood. It showed that government itself can abandon its people in fear. And it showed, too, that courage can rise where least expected, among the poor, the outcast, the volunteers who buried the dead when others fled. These are truths not written in marble, but carved into the memory of those who endured. You leave the burial ground and walk into the heart of the city. The State House stands firm again, its halls filled with voices of debate. Congress sits once more, decisions are made, and the Republic continues. But the stones remember. The silence of 1793 lingers beneath every echo. And you realize that cities, like people, carry their past not as stories but as scars. One day, another fever will come, perhaps not yellow, perhaps not here, but it will come, and when it does, the same questions will rise again. Who will stay? Who will flee? Who will bury the dead? Who will remember? You pause before a shuttered house. On its doorframe, someone has carved a single name in charcoal, already faded by rain. Perhaps it was the last act of a survivor, or the only memorial for a family. You reach out to trace the letters, and in that moment, the weight of the past presses close. And now, you too remember. And that is enough to keep them from vanishing forever. The past is not dead. It is only waiting.